Alcoholics, this is, all right, you ready? Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other. They may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And there are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. And AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And it is, have we got anybody here today who's been out improving their resume or doing intensive further research? Hey, there he is. Want to give us your first name?
Slim.
Slim. Slim is back, and we're glad to have you, man. Good to see you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Anyone who's brand new, never been to an AA meeting before? How about anybody visiting with us from other groups or out of state or outer space or wherever? Okay. Yes?
I'm Shane, alcoholic addict, but I've never been to this meeting. Hey, Shane.
Oh, we're glad to have you, Shane. All right. Give Shane a hand. Then, customary and traditional in the Freedom Group to read a portion of Chapter 5 in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we're very fortunate to have our most favorite reader with us today, Elizabeth.
I'm Elizabeth. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Elizabeth.
And it's my favorite to read this. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. And some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures avail us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. Were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to go along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could ever lead to our alcoholism. C, that God could enable if you were sought.
Good, Elizabeth, thank you. All right, today we're going to continue our discussion of the 12 steps. We've reached that part of the fifth step or the fifth chapter where the 12 steps are laid out for us. Keep in mind that when these were first written as part of chapter 5, this was the first time that the steps had ever been written down. And when we discussed that, I think last week, when Bill was moved to finally commit the steps to writing, they flowed out in just a half an hour, and he was surprised. He said he did not feel inspired, and yet when he looked to see what had just flowed out in that half an hour, those 200 words which had been changing the world, he was amazed to see what he had written. Especially amazed to find that there he had God right up front in the second step and all the way through the steps. One of the things that is so beautiful about reading the big book together and studying it together is that, of course, the big book contains the steps. So at the same time that we're studying and reading the book, we get to study the steps as well in some detail. When we got to chapter 5, however, what we found was that all 12 steps are laid out for us. So this is our opportunity to do something which is not done all the time, maybe seldom. That is for us to see how all of these steps tie together, how they all work together, how each one builds on those which came before and builds toward those which come after, and that they all form a part of a beautiful mosaic, and that it is not possible to legitimately take any one step and ask it to stand alone, because the steps simply don't stand alone. They are spiritual principles, no doubt about that. One of the best known of those spiritual principles, which we find in religious and spiritual writings and ecclesiastical writings and in all of the major religions, also find it often enunciated by philosophers, is the absolute necessity of admitting our faults to another human being, that this is a very powerful spiritual endeavor, something which we must and need to do. But think about it for a second. What would be the point of admitting our faults and our wrongs to another human being if we don't know what they were? So, of course, the fifth step, as we know it, depends first upon the fourth step having been done in a thorough and workmanlike and honest way. As we go on back from the fourth and the fifth steps, and we look at the third step, it was absolutely essential that we come to a place where we make a decision that hereafter in this drama of life, God is going to be our director. We'll be the child. He'll be the father. We make that decision to go forward with the rest of the steps and to effectuate a full and complete surrender. And of course, we never get to the second step, or the third step, until in the second step we've come to believe that there is, in fact, this higher power, this God out there who has all power. And of course, the key to everything before anything else begins is that we have come to understand and accept as a fact that we are powerless over alcohol, that we are alcoholics, that we cannot stop drinking on our own, that we must have a higher power to intervene between us and the booze, or we don't survive. I think we talked about this a couple of times, but remember that part of the definition of an alcoholic is someone whose body does not react to alcohol as normal people. We have an allergy, we're allergic to alcohol. And that when we imbibe alcohol in any form at all, it sets off this allergy. By definition, an alcoholic has this allergic reaction to alcohol. Of course, there's more to it. But what else there is to it really revolves around our spiritual bankruptcy. And one of the things that we find as we go through life is that just about everybody we have to deal with out there is spiritually bankrupt in one way or another. Most of the people we deal with in life, meet in life, have the same defects of character we do, because they're affected by the same fears that we are. The difference being that they don't drink over it. What we have found, therefore, is that the key to our continued sobriety is to understand and accept as an absolute fact that we can never safely drink alcohol again the rest of our lives. In order to effectuate that, in order to create that shield between us and the booze, it's absolutely essential that we seek, that we find, that we surrender to and become obedient to a higher power. And when we look at the net result of the 12 steps, we find that that's exactly what happens. In the 12th step, we are told that we've had a spiritual awakening. We are told that we have become God conscious, that we have entered the world of spirit, and that we have been restored to sanity. And all of these things are the result, the direct result of working the steps. So as we look at it, we realize that we cannot look at the steps except as a whole. And those who have experienced trying to half measure recovery in here have found it doesn't work. Big Book is absolutely right. Half measures avail us nothing. We don't get half recovery. The 12 steps are, as a whole, are the method of recovery which we offer here. We don't offer anything else. Oh, there's a lot of talk about other stuff, other human solutions, other cutesy pie saying, and that kind of stuff. The truth of the matter is, when somebody comes in here, sick, sore, and wounded, crawling in on their belly, screaming and crying for help, what do we really have to offer them? We've got 12 steps. That's the program of recovery. Without the 12 steps, there'd be no AA. We'd be just another cockamamie group sitting out there debating with each other about our problems. And we could elect somebody to be a facilitator, and we could have nice group encounter sessions. But nobody would get sober. We wouldn't recover. The recovery that we have is lodged in these 12 steps. Now, last week we went as far as the 6th step, but let's recap just for a second, see how we got there. In order for the 6th step to be effectuated, it was going to be absolutely necessary that we have first recognized and written down and admitted our defects of character. The subject of that 6th step is that we're entirely ready to have God remove all these things, but we first have to know what they are. As we learned after the 3rd step, it was going to be absolutely necessary for us to find and to be rid of the things in ourselves which are blocking us from God. Therefore, we start immediately upon our inventory. And our inventory is a hunt, it's a search to find out what it is that's wrong with us, what it is that's blocking us from God. Our resentments, our dishonesties, our selfishness, and our fears. And in doing our 4th step, we are led inexorably down the path where we will identify these 4 defects of character if we follow the directions implicitly and explicitly as we find them in the Big Book. Not some screwy forms or fill in the blanks or make check marks or any of that stuff. It requires that we write narrative descriptions that we get honest and thorough in doing so. But when we do that, the fourth step allows us to come out of that fourth step with a list of our defects of character as to which we have no doubt, because they've jumped right out at us. But that is not sufficient. We must then take what we have learned in the fourth step to our fifth step and articulate what we have learned. Admit what we have learned. Admit the exact nature of our wrongs. Why? Because our wrongs lead us to the fact of and the necessity for making amends. Now, when we do our fourth and our fifth step, we're finding out what's wrong with us. And what's wrong with us falls into three categories. One, our defects of character. Two, our insanities. And three, our guilts. And all of these are blockage to God. They all block us from the sunlight of the Spirit. We can't recover so long as these things are in there eating us alive, and they do. As we did our fourth step, we found out just how cancerous, just how ruinous these defects are. We found out just how badly we are disabled by our guilts in our search for a higher power and for surrender and to find some kind of comfort in our relationship with God. When we get to our fifth step, then, we're going to admit all this stuff. We're going to put it out on the table. We're going to make sure that we have not missed anything. We're going to make sure that whatever it is we found has been thoroughly revealed to not only ourselves and to God, but of course to another person. Now, in the process of doing that, some remarkable things happen. Absolutely remarkable. For example, it is in the process of doing the fifth step that we learn what we need to learn about humility. Humility has almost nothing to do with the seventh step, in spite of what you may read in the 12 and 12. Humility is a product, a result of doing our fifth step. Honesty. We learn honesty in our fifth step. Honesty comes to us naturally as we get honest, as we tell our story, as we put aside all of the dodges, all of the rationalizations, all of the denials, and we just tell it like it is. And in the process of doing that, because thought follows action, and we take right action, and we tell the truth to another human being, honesty begins to bloom in us. We also find by the fifth step that we have been relieved of our fears. The fears we walked in the door with are gone. Big Book tells us this. Our fears fall from us. This does not mean, of course, that the world and all of its people will not continue to threaten us, and therefore fear will reappear, and we need to be able to deal with that as it happens. For that reason, we have the 10th step inventory and the 11th step inventory, and we use those every day to make sure that nothing gets ahead of us ever again. As we do our fifth step, then, we are preparing ourselves for the 6th step and the 7th step and the 8th and the 9th steps. Without the 4th and 5th step, 6, 7, 8, and 9 wouldn't even exist. They would just be sitting out there as nice things we might get around to someday, but we wouldn't have the foggiest idea what to do with them. So as we have done our 5th step, what has happened is that we have found out that our defects of character are killers, they're cancerous, they're eating us alive, they have contributed to our failures, they have been a major factor in our spiritual deficiencies. We found out that we cannot abide them, we have to be free from them. We found out that we have no power over them, we can't get rid of them ourselves. We can't get rid of our defects ourselves any more than we can get rid of alcohol ourselves. And so we're going to need some help with that. But we remember then that in our 2nd step we came to believe that God could restore us to sanity. So God can take these. Are we willing to let Him? And we came to understand in our fifth step, yes, I don't want to hang on to any of this stuff. That would be crazy. It's tantamount to saying to the surgeon who's about to excise a cancer, oh, just leave some of it in. It'd be kind of interesting to see what happens. Or a house full of termites, and they're eating your house to pieces. Tell the exterminator, don't kill them all. I kind of like those little bugs. But then we've got this wild-eyed notion around here. Somebody keeps saying it. Well, God doesn't take all our defects. He kind of leaves some around, because He got a sense of humor. Lordy, lordy, lordy. Every time we put any kind of limitations on God's power, what we're doing is limiting God's ability to work with us. What's faith mean if it doesn't mean let go absolutely and trust God absolutely? Why in the world would we think that all our prayers having been answered right up to the seventh step, that now God says, oh, well, hey, guy, you're going to have to mess with this stuff the rest of your life. That's why I gave you this 10th step. That's nonsense. See, the people who say that don't understand the genesis of the 10th step. It came about simply because the Oxford people didn't have anything which was commensurate with that. They thought that they got to be perfect with their 6 steps. Our guys found out that that was nonsense. That they didn't become perfect. That the world and all of its people continued to threaten them. That there was a continual popping up again of these defects, and they had to have a way to take care of that. And it was, of course, the 10th step, which was, by trial and error, became that method, that spiritual method of dealing with life. So now, having reached this point in our 5th step, you see, we look at the 6th step and we say, the word we is in there, it just doesn't appear. We is implicit in each of the 12 steps. Because these 12 steps, of course, are the revelation to us of how the original 100 worked the steps. So it says, in effect, we were entirely ready. We were. Past participle. It does not say, in accordance with the directions of our sponsors, we made ourselves entirely ready by driving the speed limit, by putting quarters in parking meters for little old ladies on South Beach who were otherwise going to get a ticket, by brushing our teeth with our left hand, by taking a defect out of our jar every day and working on it, and then we get a major defect once a week from our sponsor, and we really have to work on that, and this goes on for 9 months. And I always ask people when they're doing that, how do you work on a defect over which you have no power? Tell me, how do you do that? I'd really like to know. What's the secret here? But that's not the 6th step. It's got nothing to do with the 6th step. The 6th step, by the way, doesn't say never or any of that foolishness. It says we were entirely ready to have God remove what? All these defects of character. It doesn't say, oh, golly gee whiz, it'd be kind of nice if we let God take a few of these suckers away from us because they're sort of messing us up, but we want to keep a few of them here. We just will never say to God, gee, you can never have these. That's not the way the 6th step is written. It's not the way it works. As a matter of fact, can He now have them all? Every one. And if there is something we're not willing to let go of, we ask God in prayer to make us willing. As in the 8th step, if we're not willing to make amends, we ask for the willingness until it comes. That's the sole big book remedy for the failure to be entirely ready. If we're not entirely ready, we stop, we don't go on, we start praying, and we ask God for the willingness to be freed from these things which are blocking us from Him. Because after all, on the very next page, what does it tell us? We think we're here originally because we're trying to set our lives in order. But it says this is not an end in itself. That our real purpose, get this, our real purpose, has nothing to do with us, is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God. and the people about us. How in the world can we do that if we're laughingly going along with all of these things that we decided we didn't want to be free of? Don't take away my lust, God. It's one of my major pleasures in life, is all my lust. I don't want to be sent off to a monastery or a nunnery. Nonsense. Whatever it is that blocks us from God has to go, because it is the only thing that's going to save our lives. And it is the only way that we can fulfill the mission that God has given us, to carry His message to others, to work in self-sacrifice for others. This is the way we grow spiritually, and the only way that we stay sober. And so the sixth step is a product of the careful and honest and thorough workings of the fourth and fifth step. It is the direct result of them. And now we have a seventh step where we humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Shortcomings, by the way, is just a way of Bill. He could not, for the life of him, use the same word twice. He had to use synonyms. And he got us all screwed up, because there's always somebody who's going to pull out a dictionary and then come at us with the dictionary definition of wrongs, defects, shortcomings, and what some of the other words he used. And so now we have to suffer through this long diatribe on how each of these words has a separate meaning, and therefore the seventh step can't really have anything to do with defects, because it has to do with shortcomings. Oh. Look at the prayer. What does the prayer ask? It says, God, take away all these defects that stand in the way of my service to you and my fellows. Right? There's no question about it. So anyway, the seventh step is a prayer, and but of course that prayer would be utterly useless, wouldn't it, until we have done the work of the first six steps. And then when we look at that seventh step prayer, we begin to see the enormous tie-in, the tie-back between the steps. Take the seventh step prayer, compare it to the third step prayer, and we find they're identical. Except that in the third step, we didn't know what was wrong with us, and in the seventh step, we do. But we're asking God for exactly the same things. And now in the seventh step, we've done the work which we promised to do back in the third step. We committed ourselves to go forward with the rest of the steps, and now we get the seventh step, and now we know. Remember, we asked God, take away my difficulties back there in the third step prayer? We didn't know what they were. We knew there was something desperately wrong, but we didn't know what it was. But now we've identified them. Our difficulties, defects of character, insanities, and guilts. And we know what they are because we wrote them down and we admitted them. And now in the seventh step, we ask God to take away these defects which stand in the way of our usefulness to Him and our fellows. So you see, they all just tie together, but one doesn't fly without the other. This is one of the dangers in reading outside material or even AA material, which separates the steps and does not consider them as a unitary whole. Because if we do that, we don't really ever get to understand the steps. Once having said this prayer, and by the way, the fifth step, and then an hour, and then the sixth step, which has really already been done, and then the seventh step. So 5, 6, and 7 are done on the same day. There's no point in screwing around with them, just get them done. The eighth step has already been done. What time is it? Oh, we've got a little time yet. The eighth step we did back in our fourth step, remember? As we looked at the second part of our fourth step is where we looked at our own faults. And we also looked to see whom we had harmed. And by the time we finished writing that list, we knew much of the harm that we had done to other people. Not only that, but we were already beginning to be ready to make amends, to set matters straight. By the time we finished our fourth part of our fourth step, our sex inventory, we had the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey says. Now we see all of those people we have harmed in our sexual adventures, in our relationships, which occupied a great big part of our lives. And there we have again become ready and willing to make amends to set matters straight. And then it tells us, just as we're ending the fourth step in the big book, tells us on page 70 that we have made a list of all the people we've harmed and have become willing to make amends to them all. So we're going to carry that list into our fifth step, because in our fifth step we're going to admit the harm that we've done to others, and we're going to be talking with our spiritual advisor about our willingness to set matters straight if we can. So now, when we finished 5 and 6 and 7, the 8th step is done, almost. Not quite. Sometimes it's done, but sometimes, most of the time, we may have to add people to it. However, one of the things which is really important here is to consider the things which we must set right, and it's a very good idea, although this is not in the big book, but it's a very good idea to write down the amends we plan to make and go over those with our sponsor to make sure that we are at least in agreement as to what ought to be done. And also to see if there may be some people whom we have left out that need to be on there, because it is not axiomatic that everybody to whom we owe amends is going to show up in our 4th and 5th steps. Quite often they do, but not always. So we have to be careful that we're not leaving any stone unturned here. These amends become of crucial importance to us because, well, stop and think about it. We have identified our defects and our insanities, and we have also identified the wrongs that we've done and the people we've harmed. Therefore, we have identified our guilt and our remorse and our shame. Now, we know that guilt blocks us from God just as surely as the defects do. Stop and think about it. How many times did we get short-stopped in our lives because we felt guilty, because we were ashamed? How many times did we feel that we were not really communicating with God, no matter how hard we tried, simply because of the guilt and shame that we had for the things we'd done? So it's obvious that we need to be free of this guilt. But how do we go about doing that? Well, you see, nothing is left to chance in the 12 steps. And this particular problem that we have is going to be solved, but only through our own actions and with God's grace. That means that the moment that we begin to make amends, we begin to lose our guilt. The solution to guilt, remorse, and shame is to set matters straight. Make amends. That's what works, and it always works. Doesn't seem like it ought to work. Seems like there ought to be more. Maybe we ought to be cudgeled and put in stocks and whipped in public or something, or put in a ducking stool to greatly chastise us for these terrible things we've done, and then we might feel shriven of our guilt, but that isn't the way it works with us. We get to be freed from our guilt by making amends. Great, huh? Now, we know that we're going to have to do this. Let me tell you that it is literally so that people who balk at their 9th step don't stay sober. And it's obvious why. They're walking around with untreated alcoholism, because these guilts that they're carrying around are blocking them from God. They cannot expect recovery and at the same time be blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit. And so it's critical that if we're working with somebody, if we're thinking about this for ourselves, that we recognize that this is not an optional thing here. This is absolutely essential to recovery and to continued spiritual growth, as a matter of fact. So that brings us then, and by the way, if we find in our 8th step that there's something that we don't want to do, that there's amends we don't want to make, we stop right there and we pray. And the big book tells us on page 76, we ask for the willingness until it comes. Now, this should be no surprise to us because we started out asking for willingness all the way back in the first or second step. And we know that when we go to God and ask Him for the willingness to do anything which is going to help us grow spiritually, we get that willingness. As a matter of fact, it's kind of ironic because before we ask for willingness in prayer, we must be about 99% ready to receive it because we know what's going to happen. If I ask God to make me willing, it is going to happen. Did you have a question?
I did, Jim. On the ninth step, I hear a lot of people talking about a loophole on this except when to do so would injure them or others.
Yeah?
Can you give me an example of how that applies and how that does not apply?
Sure. That refers to making amends direct amends to a person whom you've harmed. But also refers to those who might be harmed in the process, third parties who are not the subject of the amends.
Okay.
So it doesn't have anything to do with us. There's a kind of a misunderstanding that goes around here that's referring to not doing something that will hurt us or others. No. It has nothing to do with us. It has to do with those to whom we must make amends and those third parties who might be injured when we do that.
It's just like it refers to like an innocent bystander.
Sure, or maybe not so innocent, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
We don't
Okay.
we don't have the right to hurt anybody when we make amends.
I see. Yeah, I never understood that.
You're not alone.